you all don't know what beauty is. You don't know that you're being actively formed in beauty, and
Right.
and they were all a little offended by that. That wait, you're trying to form the way I look at the world? Well, yeah, I am.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
How's my ear?
It's glowing, just as it should be. Center stage.
I powdered it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with Paul Schaefer, Tanya Charlton, and a returning guest, Mr. Brian Lapsa. Welcome,
Hi there.
Brian. Yes.
Hi.
At Memoria Press, you are the director of our UK and European operations.
That I am.
You hold down the fort overseas, and you also teach classics at Memoria College. What classes have you taught lately?
I taught a patristics class. It was called From Plutarch to the Cappadocians last fall, and then did some teaching on our trip to Rome in this spring,
Incredible.
which we'll be repeating next year.
Okay. And Paul, you were on that trip?
I was.
I remember when you got back, that episode.
Yes.
Going to Rome
Oh
again?
yeah.
Yes.
I thought you were going to Greece.
That'll be the year after.
Oh.
We were going
Rome
to do
too?
every 2 years
Uh-huh.
was the goal, a trip every 2 years, but then people loved Rome so much. And since
Oh, they wanted to go back?
we have people on staff like Brian and Jan that can just do this,
Right.
and we already have a plan. We just decided we were going to go back. And so then Rome would end up being on the even years every year. And then on the odd years, we would go somewhere odd, as in like Greece
so you
or
mean
London or
you're going to
Paris
do
or-
Rome every other year,
and then
except
on the other
this
years,
time you're
And
doing
alternate.
it 2 years in a row.
right? Because this year was supposed to be just a unique trip to Rome, and then it has become a repetitive thing.
Okay.
Okay. So Brian, you lead some of the talks and different things on the overseas trips in
That's
Europe.
right.
That's wonderful. Okay. And you're here in Louisville because you've been at the conference.
Yes.
So
If we all
was a
look
great-
bleary-eyed,
No,
there's
you're
a
still
reason for
recovering.
that.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
great
But
conference from.
it wasn't
Yeah.
it good?
It was great.
It was. I just love having all those
Yeah.
people here with us.
It was wonderful. And for you, Brian, I know Memoria College had a graduation. You guys, your schedule was packed. You had a lot going on.
We had a full program, lots of
Yeah.
seminars,
Yeah.
and first there's always the kind of reunion aspect, a lot of people seeing each other again, which is always great. And then, of course, celebrating the graduands who become graduates. And then, just enjoying the conversation and conviviality around the seminars and the hospitality.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Well, it's good to have you here in person. I know we talked to
great to
you
be
on
here.
email, but it's nice to have you actually here.
Very good to be back.
Good. Well, today we're going to address one of our most common questions, which is about resources for adults who want to know more about classical education. So we're going to give you that. Some of the things we reference might surprise you, and some might be some you're assuming. We hope, no matter what, that they encourage you and inspire you, whether you're new to this or you've been at it for a long time. Before that, we always talk about what we're reading. Brian, I'll let you go last so you can think about it. Tanya, how about you?
I just finished this morning Dorothy Sayers' Murder Must Advertise, which is our summer read for the Memoria Press book club. So now I have to go home and start something else.
Did you like the Sayers book?
Yes, but I'd read it. I think this is my third time through.
Oh.
So
Okay.
I love Peter Wimsey. He's one of my favorites. So I've read them all multiple times. But this particular one, do you have it?
No,
In the
I
back?
dropped out of the book club. This book.
Well, in the back of it is a nice. Have you read Peter Wimsey?
I haven't.
Brian, what have you read?
Almost nothing.
Because seriously, we have literally been down here 10 minutes and I've mentioned 3 books that he has not read. And this is number 3. So Peter Wimsey, do you like murder mysteries? No.
I don't read a lot of them, but
these are
I like
so
Sherlock
good.
Holmes.
You would like Peter Wimsey. He's a lord, so he doesn't have to solve murders, but he chooses to. And he's a little bit,
Whimsical.
yeah, well, whimsical, maybe.
I'm not getting
He's
the
not
connection
like,
here, Paul.
I've
he
never
comes
read.
across,
I
he
don't
comes
know.
across as just a silly buffoon, but he's really brilliant. Oxford grad. You should
Does
read.
not bode well.
You're not even writing down the books I'm recommending. Well, there will be more probably before this ends.
Paul, how about you?
I went home on Friday and was so tired, but as I left the office, I thought, maybe I'll just bring this Sabatini book that Tanya left on my desk home, and I'll just read it because it'll be something fun on a weekend where I'm exhausted. And so I have, I don't know, maybe like 10 pages left of The Fortunes of Captain Blood. I really cranked through it.
So that's a sequel to the other one that we read,
Captain
right?
Blood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it good?
It is, but it's more episodic than I remember the original one. So like the table of contents has like 5 things, and each one of those 5 episodes has like sub chapters in it. And so
and they resolve. Each one resolves.
It's
just like his adventures as Captain Blood.
Yes. Yeah. So it's fun.
Okay.
And yeah, there's things I could say about it, but I don't want to spoil anything for anybody.
No, don't spoil it.
Especially because the book belongs to Tanya and she hasn't read it yet. So
right, no spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Brian.
So I was reading The Crisis of Western Education by Christopher Dawson, which is great. And I got about halfway into that, and then I came to the conference. And since we were meeting with Scott Newstok and talking a fair bit about this book, I thought, well, I'd better read it. So this is How to Think Like Shakespeare, and I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through that.
Okay. Winner of the Parnassus Prize.
Winner of the Sears Parnassus Prize.
I was flipping through this earlier, and I found this really funny. You're probably this far through. I don't want to mess things up for you.
9. Yeah.
Where he says, he's very blunt. A recent study conducted that the best predictor for making significant collegiate gains in reading, writing, and critical thinking was completing courses with demanding requirements in reading, writing, and critical thinking. Buzz. He's just so funny. He says, if you wish to have a faculty for reading, read. If for writing, write. So generally, if you wish to acquire a habit for anything, do the thing.
It's true.
This book is just full of just little things like that.
Yeah, little singers.
How to think like Shakespeare. Lessons from a Renaissance education. It really isn't about Shakespeare. Huh. He has a lot of Shakespearean quotes, but it really is about education.
Yeah, it's about education. I think particularly about those aspects of education which were definitely at the fore in Shakespeare's time, and those tend to be things that are definitely not at the fore of education in our own time. So, it's fun. It's very crisply done, very tastefully done, and just impressive as a sampling of the kind of reading that he's done and gathered and collected under these different headings. So
very well read, isn't he?
He is very well read.
That's wonderful. Well, why don't we tackle a listener question? This too is about book recommendations, but not exactly today's topic. We heard from Neve. She emailed us at the podcast account. It's podcast@Memoria Press. So if you have any questions, please email us. She says, I've just finished listening to the above episode, which was our defining the terms. The title was called What Classical Education Really Means. She says, I really enjoyed it. My question is, do you have any book recommendations that discuss progressivism in education in more detail? I find your podcast, particularly around pedagogy, an extremely helpful resource and would love to read around this topic. I've read 7 Myths About Education, which I thought was very illuminating. Resources on classical or home education are scarce in the UK and Ireland, so I appreciate the show very much.
Well,
so what do you think?
Nice. That was my book I would recommend to her, 7 Myths About Education.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's the best one that actually discusses progressivism, and said, all of these things where we're defending classical education don't necessarily discuss progressive education. It's just the opposite of what we're recommending. Right. But 7 Myths does. I just couldn't find my copy, and Martin didn't have one at his desk.
I didn't see it.
Well,
there.
I looked. Yeah. He mentioned it. I looked at my desk. I don't know what happened to my copy.
I don't either. Mine's gone.
Somebody went around and pilfered all our copies.
They're in high demand.
So that's by, I can never say her last name.
Daisy Christodoulou.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. It is a very good book.
Yes. I also, this is a very, from an American context, but Diane Ravitch's The Troubled Crusade would be a good one to look at because, she starts from, I think, World War II, just prior or just post World War II. I remember reading it and just being surprised actually by the numbers she gives on when high school education was made mandatory and how many students that brought into the school system that then wasn't able to educate them, didn't have the teachers to educate them. Oh. And so the Troubled Crusade is the story of sort of American education through the 20th century. And you see the progressive, push through the whole thing. And I think Ravitch there is trying to make the argument that we've made some bad decisions over the last century that we should
That reminds me of the one Martin loves, Why Johnny Can't Read.
Oh, that
and
would be
I don't remember who wrote that. But that one is another one that really slams progressive education.
Yeah.
And you can find it easily, even though I can't remember the author.
Well, and there's a Why Johnny Can't Add as well. Right.
Oh, so but the Read one is the one Martin always is talking about. Yeah.
Daisy Christodoulou is building in part on E.D. Hirsch, which is with his The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them.
Which was one of Cheryl Lowe's favorite books.
Really?
And very understandably so, because that's there he's quite polemical, but a bit like Daisy Christodoulou, not coming from necessarily the sort of classical waters that we would be coming from, but recognizing empirically, objectively, aspects of progressive education that just don't work. And he gives his historical account of where these ideas come from, traces it back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and some of his German and then American disciples who spread it through the American school system by the middle of the 20th century. But very lucid, very passionate exposition, good read, lots of data for those who are into that sort of thing.
And graphs. Well, hold on. No, he has more graphs, I think, in Why Knowledge Matters.
Yep. Which is a great follow-up. Same theme 20 years later, I think.
So. Something like that.
Yeah.
That should get her started.
I know. I was just going to say that. Neve, we're glad you wrote us, and we hope that those books got you started. And I'm sure we can link to them in the show notes or something so we can give her the titles. On to today's topic, the books that have shaped your understanding and your practice of classical education. Here's my first question. I would love to know the book for each of you that really lit the spark. It might not be the most academic or cerebral or philosophical, but what book for you made you say, this is what I've been looking for?
Are you asking me first?
Everybody. Yep.
It's this one. Everybody knows it that's ever listened to me say anything, because I'm constantly recommending Climbing Parnassus by Tracy Lee Simmons.
Lovely.
I think that is the book that Cheryl Lowe gave me when I started getting ready to teach. Maybe even before then. She just handed them out like candy. She just would buy them by the box and give them to anybody. Wow. Anybody. She just really loved it. And she had him come to our very first. He was the first invite to our HLS community lecture series. And I don't know what year it was. I had him sign my book at that point. But I already had it, and it was already marked up because she gave it to me and told me to read it. And I did, and I've not read anything else that clarified things so well for me or convinced me so well about, why we need classical education.
Okay.
Because he also talks about what has happened to us when we, since we have let it go.
Okay. Ryan and Paul?
I've struggled to come up with one that lit the spark because
you were classically
ensconced in classical education.
Yeah, when I was hired by Memoria Press, and Tiny didn't know it, and then I showed up and she was like, "Who are you?"
That it happened.
It did. It's all true. But I remember actually being more surprised as I looked at classical schools around the country and realizing like their only paradigm for what classical education was Dorothy Sayers. Because I grew up in this like a much broader thing. Like there was no question you were going to be studying Latin. Not only was it Latin, it was Greek, it was Spanish. Like it was a multilingual, like languages are important. We're going to read the great books. We're going to, discuss them. I'll also do all the quadrivium, and we're going to integrate actually philosophy into the quadrivium. I mean, it was a really fascinating thing. And the world made sense to me in that paradigm. And so when I was just looking for a job, And
trying to figure out what you wanted to do.
Trying to figure out my life. And I was like, I'll go teach for a year, and then by that point, I'll know what I want to do. That was the goal. And then when I started getting it, I was like, wait, there's people out there that don't do this. And like, I could go out there and convince them why they ought to do this. Okay. Like, that sounds great. But I had the same experience actually when I went to the boarding school. When I moved away from home in 8th grade, I was going to a boarding school, and the dean was coming around going like, well, have you studied Latin before? I'm like, hasn't everybody? Like, I had been homeschooled and bobbed around to a couple different schools, and Latin was just every school I went to happened to have Latin. So I just thought everybody did it.
Right.
And so, yeah, I can't say I have a book that lit the spark, but
that's a good point, because sometimes we wonder if our students know that the education that they're getting is different. And could they, if we said, what is classical education, could they tell us? Even though they are receiving it themselves, they are receiving a strong classical education. Do they know that? At what point do we tell them?
The first group of juniors I taught, I had the same thing. I was like, wait, you want what? You all don't know what beauty is. You don't know that you're being actively formed in beauty, and
right.
and they were all a little offended by that. That wait, you're trying to form the way I look at the world. Like, yeah, I am. But then this last group, that last couple of years, like it seemed very apparent to them. Like in the conversations, it was like they knew. I don't know what we've done the past few years, but it seemed like the seniors coming out knew exactly what we were about and what they were going through.
Yeah.
Huh. Ryan?
I think I had some oblique impulses over the years, and probably it was personal connections more than books initially that steered me in this direction. So I was very, very fortunate to have Professor Vigen-Guroyan as my undergraduate mentor. And under his influence, I read things like Brothers Karamazov, and then a group of us were working at his garden one week in the summer, just wanted to spend time in the evenings talking with him, doing literary seminars, but, pulling weeds by day and digging ditches and raising fences to keep the deer out, that sort of thing. But I'd wake up in the morning and I'd read from the Iliad, and then we'd talk about things during the day. And
How wonderful.
Yeah, it was just, he and his wife would cook these fantastic dinners. So that was, that something clicked then, and whether I would have said exactly this is classical education or not, and how I would have tied it together in terms of a curriculum, I don't know. But there was a book I read a few years later, which showed me that this wasn't as remote, maybe as I thought it was, or something so singular. There was a time when something like this was a bit more common, and that's a book called A Time of Gifts by something of a scoundrel, actually, and some rascally character from mid-century British history named Patrick Leigh Fermor.
I've never heard of that.
He is a beautiful travel writer, and I came across him because he was recommended in an essay. Basically, his prose was celebrated, possibly on the occasion of his death. He lived to a very old age, and it's possible that David Bentley Hart was writing a sort of tribute piece, mostly to his prose, mostly to his travel writing. So I said, all right, I'll pick up the book. And it's a memoir of his journey by foot in, I think, 1933 as a 17 or 18-year-old kid from Rotterdam to Istanbul. And he was hoping to do it in about a year, but he kept getting distracted by other adventures along the way. So he ended up taking this funny course, first down the Rhine and then over to the Danube and somewhere in the Balkans. He ended up spending the rest of the 1930s until the war broke out. And then the British Special Services called him up at some point and said, right, you're good with languages and you did ancient Greek at school, didn't you? So they parachuted him into Crete and helped him lead the resistance there.
Was that in the memoir?
That's yes. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But he had a fine literary education. I would say I wouldn't consider it the fullness of the classical tradition, but in terms of the languages, in terms of the literatures, in terms of emphasis on memorization, he had a great education at a tiny school somewhere in England, and because he had so much poetry stored in his mind, as he was traveling by foot again at the age of 17, he didn't have lots of money, so he would just be dependent on the hospitality of the people he met along the way. And he studiously avoided countries where he already knew the languages. So he didn't go through France, didn't go through Italy, but he had Latin and Greek, and he had this capacity for linguistics. So he would sometimes pay his way, as it were, or at least thank his hosts by reciting large stretches of...
Just like a minstrel.
Like a minstrel, yes, exactly. A minstrel in 1933. And he was passing through some countries where some pretty interesting geopolitical changes were taking place. So, and his hosts included people ranging from simple, millers and working class people. He remembered being hosted by a factory worker in Germany at this time. And, there were a few different parties vying for the attention of the German factory workers then. So that was a fascinating episode, but then also counts and duchesses and these sorts of people. But to come back to his experience in the war, and this was the moment that something really crystallized for me, was it's in the beginning of the book. It's an excerpt from a letter he wrote later in which he recounts his experiences on Crete. And as part of this, by that time he had learned German pretty well. The mission was to kidnap the German commanding officer on the island. So they acquired a German Jeep equivalent, German uniforms, and they pulled up to the house where the general was having a dinner party or dinner, something like that, possibly within the base itself. Open the door for him, he gets in, they drive away. And they say, Herr General, you're under arrest. Drive off with him. And then at some point during his abduction, they stopped and you could see Mount Ida illuminated against the sky. It's all very dramatic. And the general, who came from the literary classes of Germany, begins to recite an ode of Horace's. And he says, Vide sut alta stetnive candidum sorachte, and then he sort of trails off. This is an ode of Horace, which is about seeing Mount Soracte in Italy under snow. And he trails off and gets wistful, and Patrick Leigh Fermor looks at him, waits a minute, as if to see if he's going to continue. And when the general doesn't, he picks up and he goes through the next 5 or 6 stanzas right to the end. And the general looks at him and says, Ach so, I see. And Patrick Leigh Fermor says for 5 minutes it was as if the war had disappeared. And of course, there's all sorts of things you could say about this, because it's a poignant moment, two men on opposite sides, and who managed to find a little bit of peace. It's also poignant because it demonstrates the extent to which that war was a civilizational civil war to some extent, and also the utter tragedy of the fact that with this kind of literary education, remember I said earlier, Patrick Leigh Fermor didn't have, let's say, the fullness of classical education as we understand it, still less probably the general. There were some really bad things that were happening in World War II and committed by people who were very educated, and with some parts of the classical tradition. So that's a long way of saying that this hit me like a lightning bolt. Just that this was not all that long ago. This is a generation of my grandparents that this was happening.
Right, right.
And I didn't know anybody who would have been capable of participating in that conversation that happened on the slopes of Mount Ida.
That's right. But it used to be that most people could.
Yes, at least most people who had received an education.
Well, and the idea of traveling through countries specifically that you don't know the languages, but you have Latin and Greek, so it's going to be okay.
That's right.
I mean, I remember always thinking like these stories of people that couldn't speak like the same native tongue as somebody else, but you could communicate in Latin. I always thought of that like long time ago. I had friends who went to a Latin program, and where they lived there for like a year, and they,
Yes, spoke Latin.
Everything they did is spoke Latin. You could speak ancient Greek in free times if you wanted to. And
what a relief.
But they walked out with like friends that were, that was a Russian that they couldn't speak Russian. I mean, the American couldn't speak Russian, the Russian couldn't speak English, but they communicated in Latin, and they continued to communicate in Latin after they went home. And I mean, those things still happen.
Right.
And it is fascinating to think about that there is still that, you still find that in pockets.
Yeah. You can still find it. Yep. I have a friend in Chile with whom I communicate almost exclusively in Latin. So
Really?
except if he sends a meme, then he usually gives it an English subtitle or something like that. But yeah, for the most part, it's Latin. So,
Wow.
Well, that's how the spark was lit. What books have helped you develop a more robust understanding of classical education? And these can be kind of like the meatier or maybe more philosophical books, the ones that have really kind of been a roadmap for you.
Well, Paul helped me a lot. That's not a
Just
book.
Paul being Paul.
But
The Book of Paul.
the Book of Paul. But I've
it's an
got.
epistolary novel.
I mean, yeah.
Paul, not the apostle.
That's correct.
One thing that's helped me a lot is this little book of Cheryl, that Cheryl put together, Cheryl Lowe, of her favorite articles about classical education. They're not all by her, and they're not all even from the classical teacher. Some of them are, but there's one in here by Edie Hirsch, one by Livingston, one by Tracy Lee Simmons. So Henry Wingate, those are really good ones. But that helped me because it was bite-sized. And so, but really more than books, people have helped me in just living in this world and being around people, like that story that Brian just told, things like that are very helpful. I love The Great Tradition because it's just excerpts from, like, I've never read Quintilian, but they've just pulled out excerpts about education that came from, it's like really just readings about education by all of these ancient people. And so I've found that very helpful to me.
Up through the 20th century, right?
Up to the 20th century?
I think it has up through T.S. Eliot.
I don't know that there's anything. Oh, is Eliot
Yeah, I
in
think
here?
I think
Maybe
it
so.
is pretty. It goes pretty recent.
I can look and see. For a while we couldn't get. Oh yes, Simone Weil, Albert J. Nock.
It's a great collection.
Yeah. It is, and it's something you wouldn't want to read straight through. I don't think,
Just as a
because
resource.
it's really. Well, here I wrote,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the selections from a given author are short enough that you might sit down and say, I want to read this author, and it's not something that you would just use as a resource, but something where you would go, like a book of essays where you might read an essay and then put it down and go back to it.
For reference.
and sometimes you need those short spurts.
I was going to say, one of the things that I found fascinating was the Ratio Studiorum, the plan of studies of the Jesuits from like the 1590s.
Do you mean this
Is
Ratio
that what you have up
Studiorum?
there? Oh, it is. Look at that.
Oh, you both have the
Mine's
same
alike.
book in mind?
I didn't. I was looking at that and I didn't figure. I decided not to even try to figure out what it was saying because I was like, Brian will talk about his book. So I didn't know
Forgot I
this.
said anything.
But no, you can find it online. You don't. I mean, it's all available in PDF form or whatever online because it's from the
But
1590s.
this one's in Latin.
Public domain.
This one is in Latin. Yeah.
You can find it in English for free online. But I found some really interesting things because the 1590s, right? You've got the Renaissance coming in full swing, right? And so I was curious, like, how were they doing it, right? And the Jesuits for a couple hundred years were known as like the preeminent educators, right? And so I was very curious how they were doing it. It's really interesting to see what they were doing. And, and I've used that a lot in conversations with schools about like, how do we prioritize our time?
Oh, and this is like literally how the Jesuits taught.
That's their plan of studies. It's at this age, this is
I
what we're
like
doing. This is how
that.
much time we spend.
Why haven't you ever told me about that?
I don't know.
should
Cheryl and
read
I
it.
talked about it because at one point, and one of the points that I found really fascinating about it was like they kind of expect to get their kids at about 9 years old, and then they expect them to basically be able
I
to
need the
read
English.
Ratio Studiorum.
That's the
So I think
English.
that's
That's the Latin plan of studies.
But if I get it in English,
It'll still say the Ratio Studiorum.
okay in English.
Yes.
There's a PDF kicking around the
I
internet.
mean, I've
think.
taught second form Latin, but I don't think I can.
Yeah.
This might be a little bit,
Yeah.
a bit
steep.
much.
A little bit steep.
Yeah. But what I noticed, like if they talk about getting the kids like at basically 9 years old, and then they're going to spend 4, 5, 6 hours a day learning Latin. Like that's the only thing they're going to do. And they're going to do that for a year or two or three. And then the plan then is then you go into the great authors, but you do it all in Latin. And I remember reading that, and I turned to Cheryl and I was like, Cheryl, we should do this. and she was kind of like, well, you convince the parents. And we'll do it.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And I always thought that was her wisdom of saying, like, this is a multi-generational project. Like, if we want to get back to that,
that's not the place to start.
It's going to take us 100 years to get there, right? Because every generation is going to have to go deeper.
Yeah.
I'd love to see a school, by the time I die, I'd love to see a school on the Ratio Studiorum up and running. That's my hope. Yeah.
Well, maybe you could start it.
Challenge accepted.
But I mean, that's one of the, like, I remember saying that Cheryl, and within maybe a couple of months, like she kept talking about classical education for the 21st century. What does classical education look like for the 21st century? Because there have been ginormous content advancements of human knowledge between the 1590s and now, right?
There have.
One or two, maybe.
So, like, how do you account for that in education? And you can't account for it all, right? There's a limited amount of time, but
on the other hand, the other thing that she recognized was that we don't have brains that are fit for that.
That have been trained for that.
Right. I remember she loved those some kind of really old math books from the 30s, and she would buy them, and they'd be all beaten up, but she would go to her desk and she would come to me and say, this is a 3rd grade drill right here. I'm going to do it. And she'd go over there and take it. And it was like they had 15 minutes to do it. And she'd come back and say, I can't do this in 15 minutes, but a 3rd grader could back in the 30s. You know, that we just aren't, we've just lost a lot.
Brains have atrophied a little.
Yes, we've really lost a lot. And so we can't start there. You can't really start here. You're going to have to start somewhere else.
But that's the exciting thing about this grand project, because it is a multi-generational effort. And I think we've already seen great changes and tremendous strides in the movement from the very humble beginnings, where parents who just recognized whatever's happening in those mainstream schools, it's not working. And so we need to find something else. And then, a generation goes through that and says, yes, you're absolutely right. And I can see farther than you did. And I'm going to come back and give something more of what I've been able to see to the next generation.
Right.
And that's beautiful. And that's how it should be. So,
yeah.
What a good find. Okay. Brian, did you answer? Or was that your
I was actually saving this for slot number 3.
Okay.
But
what's slot number 1?
Well, let's move on to it.
Okay.
That would be a book you come back to again and again.
Oh.
And you could
Mine's going to be Climbing Parnassus. Yeah. That's easy for me.
Okay.
Well, that's where I was going to use the ratio, but I'll mention another book, which is worth returning to, I'd say, which is not so much a template, but it's kind of a novel. It's more of a memoir. I don't have it here, but I have a book about the book and about the author. It's not a very attractive edition, I have to say. But there was a gentleman named Thomas Hughes who was one of the students at Rugby School in the, I want to say 1830s, at the time when Thomas Arnold took over the headship there. So he was headmaster. He was a classicist. He had been at Oriel College at Oxford. I think just maybe he overlapped with Newman or maybe left early, just a little bit before that. But he took the headmaster position at Rugby School and was tremendously influential in a reform of the so-called public schools in Britain. Public school in Britain is a grammar school. Grammar school meant to provide an education in the liberal arts, in Latin, Greek, that sort of thing, which was successful enough that it drew generally the sons of the nobility or the well-to-do from all over the country. And because they were from all over the country, it was seen as a school of public interest. That's why public. So not state school, very much independent. And over the course of his time there, he reformed both the academic teaching and the moral formation. So Thomas Hughes was there, Thomas Arnold was the head, and Thomas Hughes wrote a thinly guised memoir, I think it came out in 1857 or so, called Tom Brown's School Days. So a lot of Tom.
I've heard of
Tom
that.
and Thomas. Tom Brown's School Days. And it's a beautiful depiction of, first of all, life in rural England at the time, and then a schoolboy's life at a public school of this kind. And it shows as well the kind of, let's say, pastoral approach that Thomas Arnold took as he tried to reform the school to make it more academically serious and also to make the Christian character of the school very pronounced. So in contrast to Newman and some of the others at Oriel at the time, he was not part of the Oxford movement, so not on the high church side of Anglicanism, but more low church, broad church. But partly related to that, he thought that the absolute most important thing from what I can tell from the little I've read is making sure the ethics are right. And so there are all kinds of questions about what kind of sports are being played, who is in charge of what. These schools have a complicated authority system, which sometimes went well, sometimes not so well. And he tried to infuse it with a Christian spirit. And Tom Hughes, in Tom Hughes' telling, he did it very gently and very persuasively, partly for that reason. And at the same time, dramatically improved the quality of the Latin and the Greek that they were doing. So it's a really fascinating depiction of life in a
Is it a nice narrative story?
It is, yeah, it is.
Because when you start talking about sports and how to do it, I'm not really interested. Should I erase this?
There's not that much of rugby. This is where the sport rugby comes from the school.
Oh, so, from the school? From
the school, yeah. I think it was called something like rugby football, technically in its full name. So the kind of ball that's played at rugby.
So it wasn't named after rugby.
It was.
It created rugby.
But the school created. Yes, yeah.
Yes,
the sport was named after rugby school.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
So interesting.
That does remind me also of Goodbye, Mr. Chips. I don't know why. It's just a great
Lewis Lemon sent
story.
us
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I've still got that little book he sent. It is a great story.
It's a wonderful story about a teacher.
Have you read that?
And
no.
It's very inspiring for a teacher.
Just assume I've not read anything.
You know he hasn't.
For a teacher, it's very inspiring.
It is.
But you mentioned Newman, and that brought to mind the idea of a university.
I haven't read that, but it's on my list.
It's worth reading, but also he says in there that the two goals of a liberal arts education is to be able to reason from first principles and to understand that the truth is one. And those are two goals that I go back to often in talks, because when you think about that, often you start seeing how true that is.
That's not an easy read, though.
No.
That's a book that you really would need to maybe read in
chunks.
Yes, like make a goal of a chapter a day or something, because it is. Yeah. I've looked at it. I've got it. I just haven't.
And maybe even with a group. Like, I feel like there would be a lot of really good discussions
about
like that.
I think with the group is better.
I would also, do you know of any good audio version of it? Because it was speeches initially, right? I mean, that's, I think where it came from.
The subunits, subheadings are called discourses, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's right. It has for all its, from our perspective, very stilted and stylized prose. It has,
maybe that's
for the time, I think a occasional conversational tone. But you mentioned a group. This book, Richard Gamble's Great Tradition anthology, I regularly recommend as a kind of base text for reading groups. So a lot of schools will have reading groups amongst their faculty, or homeschooling cooperatives will ask, what should we be reading? And this is just a priceless mine, I would say, of starting points for a reading group like that. As you said, it's not necessarily the thing you read cover to cover, but take a few texts and pick one for a session. And it's very, very, I came across it and used it first in that context.
It's it's huge and looks intimidating, but it's really very readable. It's just, there's a lot of words on a page. But it is broken down into small little pieces. Very, very easy to chunk through. Yes.
Got it. Okay, last question. Is there any book that may not be directly addressing classical education, but has been very helpful to you along the way?
Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
There you go.
Well, sure. I would say Hard Times.
Why is that?
Because it's literally, it's fiction, and I love Dickens. But it's a kind of a different Dickens book, because it's about progressivism. You know, Martin quotes it all the time, Gradgrind, and and it portrays the difference between a classical education and an education based on pragmatism. Mm-hmm. And you see through Gradgrind's children the awful tragedy of their lives because they have been raised with nothing but fact. Mm-hmm. And they can't recognize beauty. They have no imaginations because they weren't given that was not, if it wasn't fact, it wasn't real. And so it just, I just keep going back to that book as a nice fictional example of what progressivism is and the danger of it, the tragedy of it. Mm-hmm. Brian Lapsa hasn't read it.
I've been outed.
It's like
I was hoping we would make it to the end.
You're probably one of the most well-read people that I've ever met, but you haven't read anything that I've read.
Well, it's I would say an eclectic list. Mine is an eclectic list. So.
I feel like mine's eclectic, and you need to hop over on my side.
You seem to have read some really good things. So I've been taking notes.
Oh, okay. No. You haven't taken a note.
I didn't bring anything. I walked out of fixing the toner and the printer into the podcast room.
This is real life.
Also, real Renaissance man around here.
If I had paper and a pen, I probably would have written something down.
Well, send it to you.
Do you have one?
Yes, I would say this is only very indirectly about classical education, but it's classical education on display, and that's of Shakespeare's works. Macbeth, for some reason, I just always come back to. Which is maybe a little bit dark, but I think it's a fantastic play. That won't surprise anyone. I'm not alone in that judgment. Don't take my word for it. It's a great play, but it's also the first and to date the only play that I've seen at the Globe in London.
Wow. But did they do it right?
I thought they did it in general very well.
Pretty traditional.
Yeah. It was. In particular, the way they did the witches and I thought the Banquo Macbeth dynamic was very well executed, and the musicians were fantastic as well. So, so that's classical education on display through Shakespeare, not through Macbeth. But, the character Macbeth.
Wonderful.
Through Shakespeare, through his play Macbeth, the character Macbeth is a sort of tragic, stunted soul who missed. More than half of education's point. So,
when I went to tour the Globe, they were doing Romeo and Juliet, and they were doing it on those trick bicycle things. That what do you call that?
Goodness gracious!
What do you call that?
The ramps and stuff.
Yes, and they had the ramps, and they had graffiti everywhere. It was ridiculous. I just think, what in the world?
Orange at the skate park.
The skate park.
That's right. It was the Globe Theater.
Wow. Just an interpretation or like modernizing.
Yeah, everything's modernized. So I'm surprised you saw a traditional Macbeth. But I'm happy about it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm happy about it too.
Not jealous.
I just said, no, I'm not going to go see Romeo and Juliet on skateboards and bicycles.
Tanya and your principles.
I'm old. I'm just old and hardened.
Well, we hopefully have given our listeners lots of good recommendations. This was a good list. Some I'd heard of, some I hadn't. So
right.
I'm glad we shared.
Well, I teased Brian, but I haven't read any of these 3 big books he talked about. So
there you go.
We're even. We're just apparently have different interests.
Brian is also asked to translate like 3 or 4 books from French about classical education that then I put on my list to read so that I could evaluate whether it was worth his time. And I haven't done any of it.
Maybe that's what you should do next.
Yeah, because I have nothing else to do. If a printer doesn't bust or the website doesn't go down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Paul, all your time to
Maybe I'll read
all these
French.
books.
Be great.
Well, this was a great discussion. Yes. Thank you for joining us, Paul and Tanya, and thank you for making time for us, Brian.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And thank you for joining us as well. We'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.